I'm going to talk for about 45 to 50 minutes about stone curlew. I imagine a few of you will have seen them. They are fantastic birds. They're quite a special bird in Hampshire. We have about between a third and a half of the UK population of stone curlews, either in Hampshire or just next door in Wiltshire. So, right, let's have a look at them. First of all, this is a group of birds right around the world. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about these birds, first of all, before I go into the detail about our own stone curlew. So there are, in fact, 10 species of what are known generally as thick knees. And they all have quite thick knees, as you can see. And they also have quite similar looks about them, have yellow legs. They have usually a black and yellow beak, and they usually have a black and yellow eye. So they are quite similar looking, but they are fairly different in the way they behave and where they live. This is the one that we have. We call it the stone curlew. Quite a lot of people call it the Eurasian thick-knee. I'm not going to do that tonight. I'm going to call it the stone curlew. But this is the one that we have. And it's remarkably similar to quite a few of the others. So as I go through them, you'll probably think, how on earth do we tell them apart? So this is where ours lives. The blue area is where it has been, or indeed the purple area, because the blue and purple are wintering areas. The purple areas are places where the bird is resident all year, but obviously some of those birds move away and go north in the summer, and you can see the sort of orangey area, which is where the stone curlew spends its summer. So to be a bit more clear about that, orange areas and purple areas are where they breed, and blue areas is where they only winter. Anyway, I'll come back to that because ours is migratory and it makes it different from all the others. This is the water thick-knee, one that's found in Africa, and it's mainly found close to water. Bit of a look-alike species really with our own one, but it is very often just on mud and water and rivers, and it's right across Africa, west, east, and indeed southern Africa, so very widely distributed. They quite often get known as dicops in Africa, particularly in South Africa. I think that's what they call them down there, but we don't use that word here. Then another lookalike, I mean, much more lookalike, really, the Senegal thick-knee. And this is one that's not just found in Senegal, it's found in a number of places, but it looks so much like our own bird. If one of those turned up and was on the Downs at Broughton or somewhere like that, you would definitely think that was a stone curlew, but it's actually a Senegal thick-knee. Obviously, similar in so many different ways. And there is the distribution of that one. And as you can see, it's right across from west through to the northern part of East Africa, and indeed right up the Nile. But interestingly, that and the other one before it are not migratory. They don't move at all, other than maybe short distances within that range. So they don't move up and down the way ours does. There's also one called the spotted thick-knee, and that's mainly found in dry areas, in desert-like habitats. Again, it's very much like our own bird, with white and black in the wings like that, but a much more marbled plumage. And that again is found right across Africa. Again, you know, a big distribution, but not migratory. So the Indian thick-knee used to be part of our stone curlew, but it was split off a number of years ago, and it's a separate group altogether. They behave just like stone curlews in every way, other than the fact that stone curlew, as soon as it sees you, it hides or runs away, whereas these Indian thick-knees, I mean, they just come up to you. I mean, I've seen them driving when I've been driving around India, just look down from the side of the road and there's one by the side. So easy to see. Now my screen has just gone blank. Has that happened to you as well?
Nope.
Sorry, I'm going to put my earpiece in. I say it's gone blank. I can't see the screen, the slides anymore. Mike, tell me, can you see the slides?
I can see the slides with the Indian thick-knees grouped up.
More than I can. Okay, here we go. Something went wrong. Yep, I'm back on again. Right, okay. So these birds are very often by the side of the road. You can see them in, for example, Sri Lanka and many, many parts of India and further east as well. Next one, moving right across to South America, we have the double-striped thick-knee, a really super-looking bird, very streamlined, very tall, rather sort of dainty in the way it looks. And here's a family group of those walking around. They're found in open grasslands. And again, they're quite easy to get close to. Not a difficult bird to see at all. Completely out of character with, say, our own stone curlew. And this one is found in the northern parts of South America. So right across sort of little bit of Venezuela, Guyana, or quite a lot of Venezuela, actually, Guyana, and the sort of Latin American coastline. Not far away, again, South America, Peruvian thickney, a bit further south, and as the name suggests, it's only found in Peru. And you get them in the deserts in Peru, for example, near Lima. You get groups of them like this. And you can see the distribution here is very much along the coast, basically the coast of Peru, between, Chile and Ecuador. Over to Australia now, and the bush thickney. So this is an easy one to see. If you've ever been to somewhere like Cairns, or many places actually in Queensland, you'll find bush thickneys just walking around in the local parks. So again, completely out of character with the way that our stone curlew operates. And you just see flocks of them by the side of the pavement. They are very, very common indeed, easy to see. And they, come into gardens, they nest in gardens, and people have gardens in the sort of bush, and they find bush thickney is quite often giving them a threat display like that because they're a little bit too close to where the bird's nest is. Right around Australia, other than in the really desperately hot bits. And also in Australia, this massive one with a really big beak, slightly upturned beak, the beach thickney. And as the name suggests, you're going to find it around the beach. It really is a massive bird. It almost looks like a sort of toy, the way it's designed with that huge head and huge beak. It's a coastal bird, as you can see, right away around the coasts of the northern part and eastern part of Australia. And as you can see also there, if you're good on your geography, the southern parts of New Guinea, through Indonesia, the Philippines, Borneo, and up through Malaysia. And finally, the biggest one of all, and that is the great thickney with an upturned beak, a really big bird, really huge. When it's flying around, it's twice the size of our stone curlew. And easy to see when they're actually out on the beaches. I've seen flocks of 50 or so on the south coast of Iran. But I saw this a couple of months ago, actually. I was in Indonesia on a yacht, traveling around some of the islands there, and they were very easy to see. And you can see here, the distribution is quite widespread. There's a bit more off to the east here. And basically you can see it's in India, it's also in Iran, and it's also in Vietnam and places like that as well. Right, back to ours. Eurasian thickney, the Eurasian stone curlew, is another name for it. But also in old days, they were known as the wailing heath chicken because of the noise they make, which is a really loud sound, rather like the curlew itself. Also known as the goggle-eyed plover back in Victorian times. So the sound is the reason why they're called a curlew, because they're not actually a curlew at all, not even related to Eurasian curlews. They are called that just because the call is similar. And the name stone, I think, is because they're very often found in amongst stony fields. They really pick the stoniest of the fields you can find on the downs. And when they call, it is loud. You can hear it for at least half a mile. And when I'm doing surveys of stone curlews, which I spend a lot of my summer doing, one of the things I'm doing is going out at night and listening for stone curlews calling from fields. It's one of my favorite birds, and this is a cracking drawing of a stone curlew on the most recent set of bird stamps that came out from the post office. And what I like about this is it really shows the bird well in every way. It's got big eyes, which enable it to hunt in the twilight zone, as it were. The long legs, it shows the thick knees, as it were. And then if you look at the back end, the sort of underneath the tail, you can see that lovely rufous color, which you very often don't see in drawings of stone curlews. And that they use a lot with the male when they're displaying. And the male will basically push his tail up in the air and show the female his rather nice rufous underparts. And they like that. Right. A few facts about stone curlew then. First of all, they are 42 centimeters long. They've got a wingspan of about 80 centimeters. The weight varies a bit. Male and female are the same size, but depending on how well they've done, 430 to 500 grams. And they breed in their first year. Once they've actually made it back from Africa or wherever, or maybe Spain, where they've spent the winter, they will be able to breed in their very first year. We have nesting happening very soon indeed. April is the main time where the first brood of chicks, or the first lot of eggs will be laid, and the chicks will hatch out a month later. But they do have 2 broods. So the second brood will be probably July and August, even sometimes later, sometimes even in September. The clutch is always of 2 or sometimes 1, but it's 2 eggs, so it's only a small clutch. But that's made up for the fact that they nest twice, whereas, for example, lapwigs maybe have 4 or 5 eggs, but they only nest once. As I say, incubation, 27, 28 days. And when the chick hatches, it's only in the nest for a matter of hours, 4 hours, maybe 6 hours. Once it's dried off, it'll be off and walking. And it's an amazing chick because it can actually well, it can't feed itself, but it can look after itself quite well. It'll hide underneath little plants and things, and the adults will come and feed it from the very first day. And if they live well, the oldest one we know of is 22 years old, although, of course, many, many birds will be less than that. That's just the extreme case. So there it is, the bird. It's an unusual bird in so many ways. The eye particularly huge, but mainly for looking at nighttime. It was said in Victorian times that actually stone curlews, if you looked into their eye, you could be cured of jaundice. And so people kept them in Victorian times in pens and cages, and sometimes in their houses, in the hope that that would help cure them of jaundice. They do need water. And actually, if you've got a bit of farmland and you've got stone curlews and you've got the one and only pond that's in, say within the 5 or 6 farms, you'll get all the stone curlews coming to your pond to drink. Great way of actually finding out how many there are, especially if they're ringed. And you then see them fly off back to the fields that they've come from. So they're actually territorial on the fields where they're nesting, but once they're away from there, they're not territorial, and they're very happy to be with other stone curlews, and they do quite a lot of calling and so on, and quite a lot of communal displays that you see with the birds. And you'll quite often see 3 birds fly off together. There's quite often unmated birds in a population. They don't all manage to find a mate every year. And these could just be singles, or they could be a pair with another one hanging on. It's weird. They sometimes have almost like a friend who comes along with them in the fields. And here's one coming into land. You can see that lovely reddish brown undertail covered again. It's a striking bird. Just look at the edges of the tail feathers there. Really superb. I've actually found one of those in a field. It's one of the best feathers in my feather collection. So as I mentioned, they migrate. They're the only one of their family to migrate. And as I say, the orange areas is where they are in summer. The blue is when they're in winter, and the bit that's purpley is the area where they actually spend the whole time, and they don't necessarily have to move. But we do know where our birds go to because we ring them and we put color rings on them, and that means that when they're on the ground somewhere, they can be identified as individuals without having to be caught and without having to die, because sometimes with some birds, we only find out about their movements if they've died. So these purple dots all represent stone curlews that have been ringed either in the Wiltshire or Hampshire area or further north up in Breckland in Norfolk. Now, I put this in because it's a bit of a notable one, given that we're talking in Southampton tonight. This is a stone curlew with its colour rings. I'm afraid it's a dead stone curlew, and it's been dead a while. And the culprit for this is actually in Southampton, and the culprit is indeed this bird. This is a young female peregrine that took up residence on a tower block near Northern Bridge. And she basically, a beautiful bird, she was bringing in all kinds of stuff. You can see on the ground in front of her on the deck there's a dead woodcock. So, and she had a dead curlew and another dead stone curlew and another dead woodcock. So she she was obviously quite active at night because stone curlews migrate at night, as do woodcock. So she's probably using the brightness of the Southampton skies to spot birds like these waders flying over. Well, we know they were around many years ago. People often say to me, you know, where were stone curlews before all you lot were helping them out? Well, Gilbert White knew about them, and they clearly were quite common, according to him, in some of the counties around the south. And if you look in old books, you can see that back in 1900, they were as far north as Yorkshire. Indeed, the population of stone curlews in the UK was about 1,000 or 2,000 pairs. This is an old picture, of course, of a stone curlew. And here's an even older picture of a stone curlew. And as I say, they were kept as pets by Victorians because they were thought to be helpful. But the other thing about them is that they were kept in houses. So almost like having a pet dog. They were quite well trained. I don't think they did tricks, but they did, for example, eat strips of pork and also strips of bread, and apparently were quite well trained. And here's a couple of stone curlews with a chick in a glass case. So as a rather sad reminder of the fact they were around back in those days, and indeed they were killed. Well, I don't know about you, but my very first sighting of a stone curlew was here in Norfolk, Weeting Heath. So that's up in Breckland, and it was in the 1970s, it was the absolute place you had to go in order to see stone curlews. I'd never have even dreamt going to see them in Hampshire, just didn't even come to my mind. In fact, almost all the stone curlews in Hampshire nest in places that you can't easily see them in, because they really don't like being seen by humans. They'll avoid paths. But Weeting Heath was a good place. And it was good because it was open downland. And open downland was the traditional habitat of the stone curlew back in Victorian times, right the way up to sort of, Lincolnshire and South Yorkshire, where there were open grasslands and there was chalk in some of these places. Now, chalk is well drained, so they had nice dry grassland and plenty of rabbits, or indeed sheep, keeping the grass low. And they particularly wanted rabbits because rabbit warrens means there's areas of stony ground exposed. And here is a stone curlew on downland. But as we know, downlands have declined. Some of them have been built on. Some of them are now on farms. A lot of them are now very busy because people are wanting to walk and get exercise. So downland is a habitat that's really vanished in many, many places. If we look at the map from the first BTO Atlas, some of you may have taken part in this in the 1960s and early 70s, and you don't have to be a particularly intelligent geologist to see the strip of chalk going through there, right through the middle. And you can see right away from Norfolk, through a bit of Suffolk, down into Cambridgeshire, and down through Oxfordshire and Berkshire, Wiltshire and Hampshire. And a few, of course, in Sussex too. And actually, back in those days, they used to nest in Kent. They used to nest at Dungeness on the shingle there. Let's move forward, though. Here's the map from the most recent BTO Atlas. And you can see now that there's basically two distinct populations, or three, I suppose, and the bit in the middle has just vanished completely. So Norfolk, Suffolk, and then back down into Wiltshire and Hampshire. And in Sussex, there are just a couple of pairs, and they've been sort of ring fenced there, so you can't really see exactly where they are. It's an amber listed bird, used to be red listed, but the numbers have actually improved. But if you look at this map, it's fascinating because all the upright red triangles are places where the birds have moved into. So maybe 10 or less than that. Look at the upside down black triangles and you'll see that the birds have vanished from all those places. But in spite of them vanishing from lots of places, actually the population is now twice what it was in the 70s and 80s. And that's because we've managed to concentrate them on quite a small number of areas. So if we just turn to Hampshire, this is the Hampshire Bird Atlas. Many of you will have that. You'll see that right now, and the most recent atlas, the population is very much up in the north. These have been mapped centrally in order to avoid anyone detecting exactly which farms have got them on. We're quite careful to avoid them being disturbed. And if I just do the change map, you'll be familiar with the change maps maybe, because we showed in red any areas where birds used to breed but have been lost, and in green, dark green that is, with a plus sign, any areas where birds have moved into. Well, it's a really clear picture. They have left central and western Hampshire. So, for example, many of you would have seen them at Martin Down in the 1970s and 80s. They are no longer there now. But in the north of Hampshire, particularly, say, between Basingstoke and Whitchurch and Newbury in Berkshire, there are now lots of stone curlews nesting on plots that we have created for them, and they are really responding well. Now, when I say we, I mean by that the RSPB, backed by government money. And a few years ago, the RSPB's funding was cut. It was a European fund, and they didn't have any money to carry on doing the work in Hampshire in great detail. So Hampshire Ornithological Society was asked if we would take it over, and we now run that program. So there are 10 of us in Hampshire who actually study stone curlews for the RSPB and spend most of our summers liaising with farmers and making sure the birds are doing well. And another interesting thing is that stone curlews are now beginning to winter in Britain, particularly in Norfolk. So the climate is now mild enough that some of them have decided not to bother to migrate at all. And it's only a small number, less than it looks like, fewer than it appears from that map. But have a look at the graph. This is the graph based on data in BirdTrack, the BTO recording system, and you can see January, February, well, hardly any at all, just a few wintering ones. But then in the middle of March, the birds start arriving, and it's quite a steep climb then up to a peak in May, June, when they're very busy and calling. Then it declines a bit, then it goes up again in July, probably again because they've got their second brood, and then it declines. The last birds leaving basically either in October or November. So here are the Hampshire dates for the last year. 22nd, at the 15th of November, 2022 was the last sighting of a bird in Hampshire last year. So that was quite late, and quite a big flock stayed and were around. And they were only away for 13 weeks, and then they were back again. And the first one arrived on the 17th of February this year. And I think that is the earliest ever to be back on the breeding grounds. Really amazing. So maybe that we're going to have stone curlews wintering in Hampshire within the next 10 years or so. Let's see. One of the most important habitats now for stone curlews is the army land, basically Salisbury Plain, partly because people don't go wandering around there. Okay, there are tanks going around blowing things up, but apart from that, the stone curlews are pretty much undisturbed. They have plots which are put in there in order to make sure, plots as with bare ground in amongst all this long grass to make sure they can nest. And that's what we do in a number of places now on the farms in northern Hampshire, because if we just leave stone curlews to nest on farms randomly, it's going to be quite chaotic, and they probably won't succeed very well. So what we do is go out in the spring, indeed a bit earlier than the spring, and we find the areas where we want birds to nest. We pick farms that are close to where they're nesting already, and we agree with the farmer an area of 2 hectares. So here's 2 hectares. This is on a farm not far from, it's in northern Hampshire. And you've got basically a hectare on the left with a grass buffer in the middle and a hectare on the right. Now, the birds only need about 1 hectare of open ground to nest on, but we usually have 2, and we have the grass buffer because if they, for example, nest on the left-hand side, then what we can do is, whilst they're nesting, we can prepare the right-hand side so that it's absolutely perfect in case they fail with their first brood, and then they can quickly move the other side and benefit from having perfect habitat. And of course, if they nest on the right-hand side, we go and prepare the left-hand side. So it's a really good way of making sure that for them, they can nest very quickly because they're not here very long at all. We then have to prepare it again in June. And the reason is because, as you can see, there's lots of beautiful, wonderful, Phil Budd would be going mad looking at all these, and John, looking at all these wonderful arable plants. But there you are. And if you just look on the right-hand side of the plot there, you can see a bare area. And if you get your telescope out, you can just see stone curlews in there, but it's absolutely covered in wonderful plants. In fact, there's quite a big colony of red hemp nettle not far from where this photograph was taken. But stone curlews don't want that. They want it to be nice and open. So we get the farmers to go through and cultivate it lightly. And this is just perfect for stone curlews. Stones on the grounds, maybe bigger stones would be nicer too, because they like that. And as I say, we quite often have a buffer strip in the middle. That's also quite useful because they can hide their chick in the buffer when maybe there's some activity going on, or there's a predator around, or a kite or something like that. So next month, they will be displaying. They're not quite displaying yet. It's a bit cold for them, I think. I know this bird on the left really well. I ringed him when he was a chick. And the fascinating thing about that is that the field where he was born, and I ringed him, he now nests in, and he nests just 70 meters from his parents. So that very rarely happens. They never really tolerate other stone curlews on the same field, but perhaps because they're related, there really is a connection between those birds, and they tolerate their youngster coming back and nesting. It's a fascinating thing with color ringing, that you can actually identify birds and talk about them as individuals. Well, this is the same nest. This is his nest, but this is actually his female. So I'm just going to press the play, and you can watch a bit of video of the female coming back to the nest and settling down on the eggs. Watch the way she settles down. So if you ever get to watch stone curlews, I'll just see if I can play that again. It's a lovely thing to watch. Here we go. Just watch it once more. Watch the way she settles down. She doesn't just plonk down. She looks carefully, works out where the eggs are, and then puts her brood patch directly over the egg. So these birds have brood patches. That's a bare bit of skin underneath the breast, where if you were to hold them upside down and sort of blow, you could see the bare skin. Both male and female have a brood patch because they equally share the nest duties. Male and female will both, each one will spend about an hour to an hour and a half on the nest, and then they will change over. And that's really great for me, because if I'm trying to find the nest, then I've only got to watch for about an hour and a half or so. If I'm looking at a bird sitting on the ground thinking, is that on a nest, or is it just having a bit of a nap? After an hour and a half, it'll get up and its partner will come along and take over. In fact, the partner comes up behind it, gives it a poke on the back, and the bird stands up and walks forward, and the new bird walks in and sits down. It's quite good fun. So I'll just play that once more. Hang on. It's carrying on playing. There we go. Lovely. Right. Let me see if I can move on to the next slide. There we go. So here are some stone curlew eggs. And the thing I want to point out here is it's really not an elaborate nest at all. They basically go around and they gather up as many small stones as they can, and they plop them down in a sort of little dome. And that's to keep the eggs off the mud, because you can see it's all mud around there. And if it was raining, those eggs might get encased in mud. So it's important to find the nest on some farms. I obviously do want to find out if stone curlews are nesting. And I would like to know if they've got a nest for sure. But what I don't try and do is go and visit the nest until or unless there is a benefit to the bird in doing so. Now, you might have seen me on Spring Watch with Chris Packham, would have been in 2021 on the third or fourth program in the series. And he and I went down to a nest because we needed to know how many more days before those eggs were going to hatch. And that's because the farmer had to use his tractor very close by. And I wanted to be absolutely sure I knew when the chicks were going to hatch, because if I know they're going to hatch on Friday, I can tell him, well, probably Monday or Tuesday, you're safe doing your work. But once you've got to Wednesday, you need to keep away. So how do I do that? Well, if I know the exact size of the egg by measuring it, then I also, if I weigh it, the egg gets lighter day by day as the chick grows inside, because the chick is using up all the yolk, and therefore the egg will get lighter. You might have thought it got heavier, but it doesn't. So I know if it's a certain weight, a certain size, I can tell you it's got 5 days left to hatch. And that's really crucial, because It's dead easy to drive a tractor around a nest with eggs, but it's not so good if you've got baby chicks that might be walking around. So it's 1 to 2 eggs normally, sometimes 1. But there is a case from Germany of an exceptional case of 4 eggs, and it was 4 eggs in one nest and 2 females. So these 2 females were sharing the nest and taking it in turns to incubate. And the really bizarre thing is nobody ever saw a male. So we really don't know what happened there, and I never managed to find out actually the outcome. I imagine that none of them hatched because it would be impossible to give enough warmth to those eggs. But a really fascinating thing about stone curlews is that here in England, they have 2 broods, as I mentioned, one in April, May, the other one later on. And in Spain, where it's much warmer, and you'd think, oh, you know, they'll have 2 broods, maybe 3, they only have 1. And I can only think that the reason for that is that the ground is so dry, they can't get enough insects to feed the chicks. So therefore, 1 nesting attempt is all they bother with. So we mark the nests. That's very important. Once we've found it, we need to let the farmer know where that is. Now, I'll put this slide in to remind me that we used to put these canes in the ground, either these plastic ones or we'd put in bamboo canes, because the farmer needs to see where the nest is. You wouldn't put it right by the nest, but I might put it 5 meters either side. Well, carrion crows are very smart, and it wasn't long before carrion crows worked out that if you see 2 canes in the ground, chances are there's going to be a nice set of stone curlew eggs right in the middle. So we had to stop doing that. And now what we do is we make a little pile of stones on the edge of the field, and we tell the farmer how far to walk in to get to the nest. But it's quite hard to see the nest. I mean, you know, you can't expect a farmer on a working farm to spend all their time looking for eggs like this. And there you can see a couple of eggs on a very, very stony field. You know, they take a lot of skill to find them. So we find the eggs, we let the farmer know. And it's important because you've got sometimes, although you've got fields where stone curlews are meant to nest, sometimes they nest where they're not meant to be. So they'll move on to an adjacent farm and then they'll go and nest on a field like this. And I don't know if you could see the eggs there, by the way, just in front of the tractor. So in a situation like that, I've got to persuade the farmer to move a little bit, raise the bit at the front, move a little bit, and I make sure that the tractor tires do not go over those eggs. Or if the tractor tires are going to go over the eggs and the farmer is being difficult, then I simply lift the eggs and I remake the nest as soon as they've passed. And I take a photograph of the eggs in the nest so I can make it look almost exactly the same. But I have to say, most farmers are brilliant and they will drive around and avoid crushing stone curlew eggs. Indeed, they're quite proud of how many stone curlews they've got. So it's almost like, you know, yeah, I've got 3 pairs on my farm. You've only got 2. You're not as good as a farmer, and so on. So that's how we measure the eggs, and we weigh them a bit like drug dealers weigh out drugs. I must admit, I'm waiting for the day when I get stopped for some stupid thing in the car, and they go in the back of the car and they find a load of weighing scales. I'm probably going to assume I'm a drug dealer. So if that does happen, I hope you'll come and see me in prison. Anyway, here we are again. Once again, we've got now chicks. So we've had eggs in the field. Now we've got chicks in the field, and they're just in front of the farmer. So in a situation like this, the farmer will say, right, I've got to go around. I've got to do this. I've got to put some fertilizer or spray the field, whatever. And, you know, if he's not being paid to farm his farm for stone curlews, then quite rightly, he's got to get on with the job. So I will come in with my colleagues. We'll come in early. We'll find the stone curlew chicks. We'll find out when he's going to come in and do his work. We'll then lift the chicks off the field, keep them safe for a couple of hours, or maybe less, maybe an hour. He'll finish the job, and then we'll put them back. Stone curlews are very good at looking after their chicks. They hide them. They're much better parents than lapwings. They hide them under dock leaves and things like that, and then they will only take food to them when they know there are no kites around, and they are constantly keeping an eye to see what's above. And if they think they're being watched, the first thing they do is they crouch down like this in order to be invisible. They're very good parents. They'll chase off anything. So here's one having a go at sheep, because sheep will happily eat stone curlew eggs, I might tell you. And they also are pretty strong on getting rid of rabbits too. So the wings out open like this is the display of basically, look how big I am, go away. But if all goes well, here we have a stone curlew adult with its chick. There could be another chick, of course. Quite often what they'll do is they will divide up the family so that the male will take one chick and the female will take another, and they both look after them. Or indeed what they do is they put the chicks in the middle, and they always have the chicks between the two birds if you see the birds in a field. And it's a lovely little chick. As I say, it's very independent from the first day. That's only about, I don't know, 3 or 4 days old. It's already looking like a baby, looking like a stone curlew. It's got a yellow and black eye already. Here it is a bit older. This is getting on for about 10 days old. It's got a few feathers now. And here are 2 chicks with an adult. It's quite hard to work out when you are looking at chicks. You know, they are basically lookalikes for mum and dad. They're very good at hiding. What the parents will do, if they see, for example, me or anybody else in the field, they'll make a call. The chick will go down like this, absolutely flat on the ground, until it's told to move again by the parents, and the parents fly off completely. They leave the field. They don't make a sound. They don't want anyone to think there's anything going on. So when we're actually doing ringing of the chicks, or we've got to check them out, what we do is that we work in pairs, and one of us will keep an eye on the chick. The other one will start to walk in the field. As soon as the chick drops, the person watching through a telescope keeps an eye on where that bird should be. They won't be able to see it now. They'll have to work it out based on a sort of dandelion or something that's nearby. And they'll then, using radios, will talk each other into where the nest or where the chick is. And here we are looking after the chick for a bit. It's being very carefully looked after. I'm putting a ring on the chick. In that particular case, I'm actually putting a plastic ring on so that we can identify it in the future. My colleague Janice is holding the chick steady so that it doesn't wriggle too much. My other colleague Barry is holding the glue for the plastic ring. And then the farmer on the left, rather proudly, is taking a photograph of the whole operation. So it's really a quiz question. How many people does it take to ring a stone curlew chick? And the answer appears to be 4. So there is the stone curlew chick. And it's a fabulous moment to see the bird like this. And I'll tell you what I do is I make sure I get the farmer there, because if you give the farmer or his or her family the chick to hold, they will, from that point forward, do anything to protect the stone curlews on their land. It's just such a magic moment. People would pay hundreds of pounds to be able to do this, and I'm so privileged to be able to do it so often. And getting to measure it, checking to see the development of the beak and so on, and the wings, and putting the rings on the legs so that we know who he is or she. There's 6 different colors we've put on in the past. We're not currently doing this because we've run out of rings, actually. We've run out of color combinations, because if you've got 6 rings and you can put them in any of 3 positions on the 6 colors, and you can put them in 3 of them in any position you like, above and below the leg. There are about 5,000 combinations you can do. And we've just run out of combinations. The last one, incidentally, was grey, grey, and grey, and I was given the honour of putting that on a chick. And I did say, well, we'll never see this again. And amazingly, we saw it the next year. And it is helpful, because there's a pair that I monitor quite often, and you can see the bird on the right has got a red ring on one leg and white on the other, and that bird has been on that field for 7 years. I have no idea if it's got the same partner, but I think it probably has. And one of the other things we do is we make sure we know when the farmers are going to be cutting crop. For example, these birds were born on a field that had been designed for the stone curlews, so one of our 2-hectare plots. And because, they're bare, when they want some cover, they wander off to the nearby field, which is okay until the next farmer wants to harvest the rape. So I persuaded the farmer to start at the very far end of the field, and then move the combine harvester slowly up and down eventually getting nearer and nearer. It was agonizing. It took about 2 hours to do. All this time we were trying to find the chicks. We knew they were in the rape. And then we got to the final strip where the last bit of rape was about to be cut. And I was in radio contact with the farmer, and he was really carefully and slowly moving along with the combine. And then just when it was about 15 feet away from where the chicks were, they ran out because they didn't like the noise, and they ran out into the open field. And 4 of us from all directions ran after them and caught them. And here they are in the back of my car, just waiting for that all to finish. And we've put some rings on them as well. And they're really calm, lovely birds to have. They just settle down totally because they're only about 3 weeks old. And here is a sort of thank you note from the chick for all my efforts, is a great big dollop of poop in the back of my car. Chris Packham, as you probably know, is a big fan of bird droppings. He's never, ever seen stone curlew poo. So I've got one over on Chris for once, which is nice. And I can tell you it's quite pungent, something that you don't forget. And the really good thing is when you then see the parents a bit later, here we have the chicks again, and you can see these 2 chicks in front. Now, they are quite different to my eye than the parent behind. So the parent behind is very, very clearly marked. The ones in front, a little bit darker. And the sort of brown and white on the face is a bit more puffy, a bit more brown than white, I suppose. So they do look a little different. And the nice thing is if you can see them as family groups walking around like that, and you know it's all gone well and it's been worth doing. So when we started out on all this, I mean, this is not the full map, but, you know, this is just Wessex. So this is Wiltshire and Hampshire. There were about 40 pairs of stone curlews across the whole of the Wessex area. And the latest figures are actually in excess of 140. So we really have been able to increase not only productivity by avoiding situations where the birds are going to get killed, because in normal farming operations, they simply can't survive without our intervention. Not only have we increased productivity, we've increased the numbers too. And now we've got more and more stone curlews in Hampshire nesting on farms where there's no plan for them to nest there. They're just nesting in crops. But we've got a team of 10, so we can go out and talk to all the farmers, and they happily phone us up. The little dip here, by the way, in 2001, well, not a little, quite a big dip, that's actually down to foot and mouth disease. Probably not really that helpful having that dip in there, because it's not a real dip at all. The birds were there, we just couldn't count them. And at the end of the summer, the great thing about stone curlews is they get together in flocks, and we don't publicize where they are, but I regularly monitor a flock of 60 or so stone curlews in one field in northern Hampshire, and it's got to be the whole population for northern Hampshire together. So something like 20 pairs with you know, maybe 20 chicks in total, because in total they could in theory rear 4 chicks in a year, but because they don't always manage to do it. What we want to do is to get at least 0.6 of a chick per pair per year, and what we do know is we're exceeding that most years, and so therefore the population is rising. So this photo is a fantastic photo to be able to show you. And the last photo is simply a shot of me holding a baby stone curlew. And thank you very much indeed for listening.